Welcome back. Well, we are speaking really about what happened on the 6th of October 1973 and about the Egyptian army then. But what about the Egyptian armies? What about the Egyptian soldiers all over the ages, decades, centuries, and thousands of years? Were they that heroic? Should we all be that proud of our Egyptian armies throughout the ages? It's a very big yes. But we are going to know more details with our dear guest live here in the studio, Mr. Ihab Kamel, our researcher and historian. Thank you very much for being with us, sir.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Ihab.
Good morning.
Now, to shed more light from a historic point of view on the Egyptian army, and when did Egypt have its first organized army or its first army? To the best of my knowledge, the Egyptian army never ever invaded or occupied other lands, but it was basically defending its own land. Is this information true?
It is true, but actually the techniques became different. When we look at the history of the Egyptian army, we will find that the first scene that shows an organized army, it's the scene on the Palette of Narmer. That was speaking about the army of King Narmer when he was in his unification battle. We can see soldiers, the standard bearers in the front, in a march. And basically this shows that there was a kind of organization as early as the first dynasty, and maybe a little bit earlier. Later on, during the Old Kingdom, we had started to see an organized army that consisted of volunteers and the royal guards, and at that time the military campaigns were quite limited. They were mostly defensive. You would find that every now and then the pharaoh has got to send a campaign to the west so that he would protect the western borders from the Libyan tribes, or to the south to protect the southern borders from the Nubian tribes. And this was the strategic points that Egypt needed to protect in those days. But still, the army was small, depended mainly on recruits beside a big force, or relatively big force. That was the force that was protecting the pharaoh himself. And in most cases, the pharaoh himself, he was the leader of the army. Then we come to the Middle Kingdom, and the Middle Kingdom came after a period of disturbance that led to a great influence for the governors of the governorates, and Egypt was kind of split into several zones of influence, and each one of the governors had his own armed forces. Actually, in the Middle Kingdom, the pharaohs of the Middle Kingdom had used this situation after they retrieved back the country's glory and they succeeded in reunifying the country, and we had a strong central government. We find that the pharaoh himself, or the king, he had the biggest military force or militia to protect him. And if there was a necessity and there's a great threat, he would force the governors of the governorates to contribute with a number of their soldiers from their own local militia, because at that time Egypt had a different defensive policy, that every governor close to a borderline used to defend it by himself. Unless the danger was too big, that's when the biggest force, the force of the pharaoh, would interfere using some of the forces of the local governor. And we were very surprised to find in a tomb dating back to the 10th or the 11th dynasty in Asyut a statue, wooden statues showing an Egyptian battalion.
Okay.
That's showing that they were in a military march, very well organized, standing in lines, each line of 10 soldiers, and we have 4 lines. This was like a little unit of a battalion. And we found...
But this means that there were soldiers and officers, there were ranks?
Rankings.
Yes, yes, by all means.
Depending on what? I mean, there were no military academies then.
Yes, this is true, but based on their general education, based on their experience,
or training.
And training, because all the nobles part of their education was military
Was
education.
military,
It was
yes,
the same thing in Europe up till the 19th century. If you're a noble, you have only...
But the pharaoh was all the time the leader or the commander of
yes,
all the
he
armies.
is the high commander
The
of
high
the army,
commander,
and he leads
okay.
the army by himself in the battlefield. Then we came to the New Kingdom period. The New Kingdom, that was the turning point. That's when you started to have a professional army. Starting from the time of King Thutmose III, you started to have professional officers, professional soldiers who made their living out of being soldiers.
Yeah.
They were given land that were exempted from taxes. They were given the gold of courage and so on. And that's when you started to have the professional soldiers. You started to have a class of soldiers. Not only this, but always you will find that the scribes, they always criticized the soldiers to try to attract the children to become scribes or government employees. It's better than the life of the soldier because they make a big effort, and when they come back, they get paid very little. Actually, that was not true. And they kept telling them that you will be better educated than a soldier. You will find that in the New Kingdom, the soldiers became very well educated. The officers very well educated. They came from the intelligentsia of the Egyptian community. They were educated in the temples, and they were prepared to be scribes at the beginning, but they turned out to be soldiers. So you will find that the army leaders, they were on a very high standard of education and culture.
Okay. Speaking of Thutmose III, is he recognized as one of the greatest army leaders in history?
Thutmose III is the greatest army leader in history. He is the first emperor in history. 17 campaigns. He had never been defeated
He
in
never
any.
lost one.
He never lost one. And Thutmose III, in case many people do not know, he is the one who had put the theory of the national security for Egypt, that he does not wait until the army comes to the Egyptian borders. No, he just pushes the threat
On the
and
border.
before the
Before the
borders.
border.
His borders were Syria. So when at that time there was a big regional power at that time, the power of the Mitannies, he did not wait until he meets them on the Egyptian borders. He went and he met them in Syria, north of Aleppo at the Orontes River, which is not the river of Al-Asi at the moment.
Yep. Sir, we are running out of time, but I have a yes or no question. At any time, did we have mercenaries paid to fight?
In the very late periods.
Well, Mr. Ihab Kamel, our researcher and historian, thank you very much for your input, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And great, of course, talking to you and talking about the glories of the Egyptian army since the ancient times. Nothing new to the Egyptian army. It's deeply rooted in the history of the army. So thank you very much for shedding light on that. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us in this edition of The Breakfast Show, brought to you by my colleague Nermeen Abdurrahman and myself, Halil Hamila. We're wishing you a very good day. It's a day off for most of you, not for us. So enjoy the day and always read and tell your children about this very important day. That's very important. Thank you very much for being
Or
with
at
us.
least we are going to watch some of the movies which talked about the 6th of October war, how the war was portrayed. Let's watch. Thank you very much for being with us. Stay tuned only on Nile TV International, always for more.